بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the first session of our study in Nahw. Today we're going to touch upon the definition of Nahw, the objective of studying Nahw, and the subject matter of Nahw. First, starting off, the definition of Nahw. Okay, Nahw is often translated and expressed as syntax. Okay, a technical definition of Nahw is as so. Right. Nahw touches upon principles used to recognize the diacritical mark of the last letter of words and the manner of constructing words together into sentences. And this is what Nahw touches upon. Right? You have knowledge regarding principles used to recognize the diacritical mark of the last letter of words and the manner of constructing words together into sentences. So over here, we can actually deduct that we have two things here, right? We have the principles used to recognize the diacritical mark of the last letter of words. That's the first thing Nahwa touches upon. The second thing Nahwa touches upon is the manner of constructing words together into sentences, meaning making sentences from words. Alright, so let's go through this one by one. So Nahwa touches upon knowledge regarding principles. Right, we have principles, and this is a recurring theme when it comes to the fields of Sharia. Within the definitions, they'll mention that the field is about principles. Example, usul fiqh is the same, usul hadith is the same, and so on, right? And even outside of Sharia, you can actually find something similar. Example, maths, right? Maths, you have formulas. More formulas are not really principles, but they work the same way, right? They work in a similar manner. When you actually look at both principles and formulas, right? Formulas you use to actually work out equations, right? And similarly, when it comes to principles, you use principles to actually work out matters, right? You have matters, and those matters will fit in accordance to the principle, and using those principles, we're actually going to work out and actually find out the conclusion and deduct those matters, correct? So this concept is there, even though principles probably not the accurate term to use when it comes to outside of Sharia. For example, when it comes to maths, it's formulas, but formulas and principles kind of work the same way, if you get what I mean. So principles used to recognize the diacritical mark. Okay, now we need to understand what is this? What does it mean by diacritical mark? This fancy term over here. Diacritical mark, like when you have in the Arabic language, you have, for example, a sentence, right? You have Ja'a Zaydun. Ja'a Zaydun. In the Arabic language, we have these marks, right? We have these kind of marks. You have this, you have this, you have this, you have this, and then we have this, right? These marks over here, either on the top or the bottom, right? These are called diacritical marks. What Nahwa does, it teaches you how to actually work out the diacritical mark of the last letter of each word. And when I say word, word is very generic. A word can either be a noun, a verb, or a particle. So when we use the term word in our studies, right, in Arabic grammar, it's very generic, right? The first thing that should come to mind, okay, the term word is being used. Okay, the word can either be a noun. Sorry, this is really, but kind of just went off track there. A noun, a verb. Right. I'm using a cursor, so you're gonna have to bear with me. I know it looks really bad, but it's harder than it looks because I'm using a cursor. I'm not using a mouse or anything. Or it can be a particle. A word can be a noun, a verb, or a particle. Right. So what does Nahwa touch upon? Nahwa touches upon using principles to actually find out the diacritical mark of the last letter of words. Right? And words can be a noun, a verb, or a particle. Does that make sense? Now over here, this example that we've given over here, the diacritical mark is already mentioned, right? But sometimes when you're reading Arabic, the diacritical mark is not actually mentioned. It's not actually mentioned. So example would be, let's give a different verb. This is a verb, right? Right. So akala zaydun. Akala zaydun. Now, how do you work out the diacritical mark of the last letter of Zayd over here? Over here, we gave the answer, right? But how do you work this out? Now, we look at this sentence. This is a sentence, right? Akala Zaydun actually gave the answer away, right? Because I mentioned it. But nonetheless, if you were to just read this, how would you actually find out the diacritical mark of this last letter? Because that's what Nahw touches upon, right? Nahw touches upon finding out the diacritical mark of the last letter of words, and the last letter of Zayd is Dal. How do you find out the i'rab? This is called i'rab, right? Diacritical mark is called i'rab. You know, these marks over here, right? The Dhamma, Fatha, and Kasra, these are called i'rab. Okay, if you wanted to translate it in English, you can translate it as diacritical marks. So how do you find out the diacritical mark of the last letter of this noun? Because this is a word, right? And the word is a noun, right? How do you find out the diacritical mark of the last letter of this noun, which is Zaid? Diacritical mark of specifically this dal, right? That's what Nahwa touches upon. Now, we use principles, okay? Now, akala is a verb. A verb needs a fa'il. It needs a doer, right? There's a doer to actually do the verb. So akala Zaydun, Zayd ate, right? So the action of eating is associated with Zayd, means Zayd is the one who's doing the action of eating. Okay. So now that we found out that Zayd is doing the action of eating, he's the one eating. He's the fa'il, as we call it in Arabic grammar, in Nahwa terminology, we call it fa'il. He's the fa'il. Zayd is the fa'il. He's the doer of the action. Now that we've actually found that out, there's a principle in Nahw. Remember, Nahw touches upon principles, right? We use those principles to actually find out, to recognize, to know the diacritical mark of the last letter of words. Right? There's a principle, kullu fa'ilin, kullu fa'ilin مرفوع كل فاعل مرفوع. All fa'ils, all doers are in the marfu state. What is the marfu state? The marfu state in this case is going to be expressed as so, with two dhammas. Two dhammas, also called dhammatain. You call it dhammatain. Two dhammas. This is a dhamma, right? Even here there's two dhammas, right? So now, according to this principle, because Zayd is the fa'il, he's the doer of the action, and because all doers are in the marfu state, and the marfu state is expressed in this example specifically with two dhammas, also known as dhammatain, we know the i'rab of the last letter of this word, which is a noun, is as so. So you understand how we actually use principles to find out and to actually detect and recognize the diacritical mark of the last letter of a word. Ja Zaydun is the same, right? But we actually gave it away from the very beginning. We didn't actually mention the i'rab over here, but we mentioned the i'rab from the beginning over here. Well, Zayd is the same. Zayd is the doer of this action. Zayd is the one who's going, or he went, right? Ja Zaydun, Zayd went. The action of going, okay, specifically the past tense, right? Because ja means he went. So Zayd went. The action of going is associated with Zayd. Zayd is the one that's doing this action of going. So Zayd went. And because Zayd went, Zayd is the one who's doing this action. So he's the fa'il. He's the doer. He's the one doing the action. According to the principle, kullu fa'ilin mawfu. All fa'ils, all doers are in the mawfu state. And the marfu state is going to be expressed using these two dhammas, also known as dhammatain, in this example, just like this example over here. So you understand how we use principles Okay, in Nahwa we use principle used to actually recognize a diacritical mark of the last letter of words. That's the first thing Nahwa touches upon. The second thing Nahwa touches upon is the manner of constructing words together into sentences. Meaning, Nahwa teaches you how to actually make sentences from words, because you use words to make sentences, right? That's even in the English language, right? In the English language, you use words and you put words together to actually make sentence. Nahwa is no different, right? Arabic grammar is no different, right? So, principle used to recognize the diacritical mark of the last letter of words and the manner of constructing words together into sentences, right? These two are what Nahwa touches upon, right? So, the objective of Nahwa now is to safeguard oneself from making grammatical mistakes. Use Nahwa, and not just Nahwa Sarf, as we're going to actually get into in the next lesson, when we actually touch upon Sarf, in terms of its definition, its objective, and subject matter, is to safeguard oneself from making grammatical mistakes. Example, over here, if you were to actually make this i'rab different, it would be grammatically incorrect. So say like you were to say, for example, can I rub this off? Yeah, I can. Can I rub it all off? Maybe not. That was a flop. Alright, if I was to say, example, I can't rub it all off, can I? No. Nonetheless, it's fine. If I was to say, for example, yeah, instead of two dhammas, I was to make this two fathas. That would be grammatically incorrect. If I was to say ja'a zaydan, two fathas, so fathatain now, right? This can be called fathatain, two fathas. It's called fathatain. If I was to say ja'a zaydan, this is grammatically incorrect. It's not even denoting the meaning that ja'a zaydan denotes. Ja'a zaydan denotes the meaning of zayd went. Ja'a zaydan does not denote that meaning. It's grammatically incorrect. But just by changing it at all, it makes the sentence grammatically incorrect. So the objective of Nahwa, okay, and not just Nahwa, but so is to actually safeguard oneself from making grammatical mistakes. The subject matter of Nahwa includes words and sentences. It includes words because in Nahwa, as we mentioned, it's all about finding out the diacritical mark of the last letter of words. Remember, so from that perspective, the subject matter of Nahwa includes words. It also includes sentences because of this next part. Nahwa also touches upon the manner of constructing words together into sentences. So the way to make sentences without making grammatical errors, Nahwa also touches upon that. So from that perspective, Nahwa also touches upon sentences, hence why the subject matter of Nahwa includes sentences. So the subject matter of Nahwa is both words and sentences.